Have you ever wondered what happens when immense power collides with unshakable principle? What happens when a queen defies an emperor in front of his entire kingdom? Today, we're diving into a story of opulence, pride, and a shocking act of defiance that changed the course of history. This is the incredible tale of King Xerxes and the brave Queen Vashti. Our story begins in the heart of the mighty Persian Empire, around 483 BC. The man at the center of it all is King Xerxes, also known in the Bible as Ahasuerus. This wasn't just any king. He was the ruler of an empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia, encompassing 127 provinces. He was, for all intents and purposes, the most powerful man on earth, and he wanted everyone to know it. To showcase his glory, his riches, and the sheer might of his kingdom, Xerxes decided to throw a party. But this wasn't your average get-together. This was a feast that would last for an astonishing 180 days. That's 6 full months. Imagine it. For half a year, the capital city of Susa was the epicenter of the most extravagant celebration the world had ever seen. Princes, nobles, military leaders, and governors from every corner of the empire were invited. The Bible describes the scene with breathtaking detail. The royal palace was draped in fine linens of white and blue, fastened with cords of purple to silver rings and marble pillars. The couches for the guests were made of gold and silver, set upon a mosaic pavement of precious stones. It was a spectacle designed to awe and intimidate, a clear statement of Xerxes' supreme authority and wealth. And the wine? It flowed freely, served in golden goblets, each one unique. The king's orders were simple: drink as much as you desire. Royal generosity was on full display. After these 180 days of showcasing his power to the elite, Xerxes threw another party, this one lasting for 7 days. This celebration was for everyone in the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least. It was the grand finale, a week-long festival held in the enclosed garden of the king's palace. While the men feasted with the king, Queen Vashti was hosting her own banquet for the women in the royal house. Everything seemed perfect. The empire was at peace, the king was celebrated, and the wine was flowing. But it's often in these moments of peak arrogance and indulgence that the seeds of crisis are sown. On the 7th and final day of the feast, the atmosphere was at its most boisterous. The Bible tells us the king was in high spirits from wine. In modern terms, he was drunk. And in this state, his pride swelled to a breaking point. He had shown off his wealth, his power, his palace. But there was one more treasure he wanted to display: his beautiful queen. So he summoned his 7 most trusted eunuchs and gave them a command. "Go," he ordered, "and bring Queen Vashti before me, wearing her royal crown." He wanted to show off her beauty to all the people and the nobles. In his mind, she was the final, most prized possession in his collection, the ultimate testament to his greatness. It was a command born not of love or respect, but of intoxicated pride. He saw her not as his partner, but as an object to be paraded. The eunuchs scurried away to deliver the king's message. Everyone waited in anticipation. The king, smiling, expected his queen to appear, the crowning jewel of his magnificent display. But what happened next was something no one in the Persian Empire could have ever imagined. The message came back. Queen Vashti refused to come. Silence must have fallen over the garden. The music would have stopped. All eyes would have turned to the king. Refused. The queen had refused a direct command from the most powerful man on earth. It was unthinkable. The text says the king became furious, and his anger burned within him. This wasn't just a personal slight. In his eyes, it was a public humiliation. In front of all his princes and subjects, his authority had been openly challenged by his own wife. Why did Vashti refuse? The Bible doesn't explicitly state her reasons, which has led to centuries of speculation. Was it a matter of modesty? The command was to appear before a hall full of drunken men. Perhaps she felt it was undignified and degrading for her, as a queen and as a woman, to be objectified in such a way. Was it a matter of principle? Maybe she was making a stand against her husband's drunken, egotistical whim, refusing to be treated as just another one of his possessions. Or perhaps it was a political calculation, a power play of her own. We may never know for certain, but what we do know is that she chose to say no, fully aware of the potential consequences. The king's fury wasn't just a fleeting emotion. His pride was wounded, and his authority felt threatened. A king who couldn't control his own wife, how could he be expected to control an empire? He immediately turned to his wise men, the experts in law and justice. According to the law, he asked, what must be done to Queen Vashti for not obeying the command of King Xerxes? The king's advisors saw this not just as a domestic dispute, but as a potential crisis for the entire kingdom. One of them, a prince named Memucan, stood up and articulated their fears. He argued that Vashti's defiance wasn't just against the king, but against all the officials and all the people of the empire. He painted a picture of societal collapse, warning that when news of the queen's refusal spread, all the women in Persia would start to disrespect their own husbands. This very day, he predicted, the noble ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's officials in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. His solution was drastic and immediate. He proposed that the king issue an irrevocable royal decree to be written into the laws of Persia and Media that Vashti was never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Furthermore, her royal position should be given to someone else, someone better than she. This, he argued, would send a powerful message throughout the vast empire. When the decree was proclaimed, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. The king, still fuming and surrounded by advisors who were amplifying his anger, agreed. The plan pleased him and his princes. So, the decree was written. Letters were sent out to every province, to every people in their own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own house. Queen Vashti, for her one act of defiance, was deposed. She was banished from the king's presence and stripped of her crown and title. She disappears from the historical record, a queen who lost everything because she refused to be a king's trophy. This dramatic and harsh decision created a power vacuum. The search for a new queen would begin, setting the stage for one of the most remarkable stories in the Bible, the story of Esther. Vashti's stand, whether you see it as brave, foolish, or simply a mystery, was the catalyst that changed everything. It was the unpredictable event that opened the door for a young Jewish orphan to become queen and ultimately save her people. The story of Xerxes and Vashti is a powerful lesson about the dangers of unchecked pride and the explosive consequences of mixing power with insecurity. King Xerxes, in his drunken arrogance, created a crisis where there was none. And Queen Vashti, in her silent refusal, made a choice that echoed through the halls of history. It reminds us that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is a simple, principled no. What do you think? Was Vashti a hero? Was the king's reaction justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Her story is often overlooked, but it's a critical part of a much larger narrative of courage and divine providence. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Persia. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and scripture, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Have you ever felt like you were in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or maybe that you were just an ordinary person caught up in events far bigger than yourself? Well, our story today is about a young woman who might have felt exactly that way, but she would soon discover she was in the right place at the right time, for a purpose she could never have imagined. Welcome back, everyone, as we journey into one of the most dramatic and inspiring stories of all time, the story of Esther. Our tale begins in the mighty Persian Empire, ruled by the powerful King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes. Imagine a kingdom stretching from India to Ethiopia, a vast and diverse land. King Ahasuerus was known for his grand feasts and opulent displays of wealth. During one such celebration, a lavish 180-day festival designed to showcase the glory of his kingdom, things took an unexpected turn. On the final day of the festivities, the king, a bit too merry from the wine, made a public demand of his wife, Queen Vashti. He ordered her to appear before his guests, wearing her royal crown to show off her beauty. But Vashti, a woman of dignity and principle, refused. This was an unprecedented act of defiance. Imagine the shock rippling through the court. A queen openly disobeying the king in front of all his nobles. The king's advisors were in an uproar. They argued that if the queen's disobedience went unpunished, women contratos all over the empire would be inspired to disrespect their own husbands. And so, on their advice, King Ahasuerus deposed Queen Vashti. She was banished from his presence, and a royal decree was sent out across the land. The throne was empty, and the search for a new queen began. This is where woman's story truly takes a pivotal turn. The king's servants proposed a rather unusual method for finding a new queen, a kingdom-wide beauty pageant. Messengers were sent to every province to gather all the beautiful young virgins and bring them to the palace in Susa. There, they would undergo a year of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics, before being presented to the king. From among them, he would choose his new queen. Now let's zoom in on one particular home in the city of Susa. Here lived a young Jewish woman named Hadassah. You probably know her by her Persian name, Esther. Esther was an orphan. Her parents had passed away, and she was raised by her older cousin, a kind and righteous man named Mordecai. Mordecai loved Esther as if she were his own daughter. The scriptures tell us she was lovely in form and feature, possessing both inner and outer beauty. When the king's decree was proclaimed, Esther was among the many young women taken to the palace. It must have been a terrifying and confusing time for her. Whisked away from the only home and family she had ever known, she was thrust into the competitive and unfamiliar world of the royal harem. But Mordecai, ever watchful, gave her a crucial piece of advice. He told her, "Do not reveal your people or your family background." At that time, it was dangerous to be known as a Jew in a foreign land. Trusting her cousin, Esther kept her identity a secret. Mordecai, meanwhile, was deeply concerned for her. Every day, he would walk back and forth near the courtyard of the harem, trying to catch any news of how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. Inside the palace, the young women were placed under the care of a eunuch named Haggai, the keeper of the women. And right away, something special about Esther began to shine through. She immediately found favor in Haggai's eyes. He provided her with the best beauty treatments, special food, and assigned 7 choice maids to attend to her. He even moved her to the best quarters in the harem. Esther's graciousness and humility won over everyone she met. After her 12 months of preparation, the time came for each young woman to go to the king. When it was Esther's turn, she didn't ask for any lavish jewels or clothing. Instead, she wisely took only what Haggai, the king's eunuch, suggested. Her simplicity and natural grace set her apart, and when King Ahasuerus saw her, he was captivated. The Bible says the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. He didn't hesitate. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. To celebrate, the king threw another magnificent feast, this time in Esther's honor. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Esther, now the Queen of Persia, sat beside the most powerful man in the known world, but she never forgot who she was or where she came from. She continued to follow Mordecai's instructions, just as she had when she was a child under his care. So here we have it, a young orphaned Jewish girl, now the queen of a vast empire, her true identity hidden. It seems like a fairy tale ending, doesn't it? But this is only the beginning of her story. Little did she know, her position, her courage, and her faith would soon be tested in a way she could never have foreseen. She had been placed in the palace for such a time as this, and the fate of her entire people would soon rest on her shoulders. This part of the story teaches us so much about humility, obedience, and divine timing. Esther didn't claw her way to the top. She showed grace and humility, and doors opened for her. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us to our greatest purpose. What seems like a detour or a setback might be God placing you exactly where you need to be. This is the story of Haman's wicked plan, a pivotal moment in the Book of Esther. Last time, we met Queen Esther, a woman of incredible courage and grace. But as her star was rising, a shadow was falling over the Persian Empire. This shadow had a name, Haman. Now, Haman wasn't just some minor official. After the events we've discussed, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, promoted Haman to a position of immense power. He was made the prime minister, the second most powerful man in the entire kingdom. The king commanded that everyone bow down and pay honor to Haman whenever he passed. It was a decree, the law of the land. And for a while, everyone did. Everyone, that is, except for one man. His name was Mordecai. You'll remember him as Esther's cousin and adoptive father, the man who had saved the king's life from an assassination plot. Mordecai sat at the king's gate, a position of some importance, and day after day, as Haman's grand procession passed, Mordecai would not bow, he wouldn't kneel, he wouldn't pay him any honor. This wasn't just a stubborn act of defiance. For Mordecai, as a devout Jew, bowing down to any man in a manner that bordered on worship was a violation of his faith. His allegiance was to God alone. At first, the other royal officials at the gate were confused. They questioned Mordecai. "Why do you disobey the king's command?" They urged him day after day, but he wouldn't listen. Finally, to explain his unshakable stance, he told them he was a Jew. Curiosity turned to malice. The officials, perhaps wanting to stir up trouble or maybe just to see what would happen, went straight to Haman. They told him, "There's this man, Mordecai, a Jew, and he refuses to bow to you." Can you imagine the scene? Haman, a man swollen with pride, accustomed to absolute reverence, learns that one man, a single individual, dares to defy him. The scriptures tell us that when Haman saw for himself that Mordecai would not bow, he was filled with fury, an incandescent rage, but in his twisted mind punishing just one man wasn't enough. That was too small, too insignificant for a man of his stature and his level of fury. When he learned that Mordecai was a Jew, his personal vendetta metastasized into a genocidal plot. His hatred wasn't just for Mordecai anymore. He decided he would destroy not only Mordecai, but his entire people, all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly personal pride and prejudice can escalate into unimaginable evil. Haman's wounded ego demanded a price paid in the blood of an entire nation. So, how does one orchestrate a nationwide massacre? Haman, being a superstitious man, decided to leave the timing to fate. In the first month, the month of Nisan, he commanded that they cast the pur, which is the lot, like casting dice, to determine the perfect day and month for his horrific plan to be carried out. The lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. This gave him nearly a year to prepare. The delay, which Haman saw as divinely appointed, would ironically become the very window of opportunity his victims needed. With the date chosen, Haman went to the king. He didn't approach Ahasuerus with the truth, of course. He used manipulation, half-truths, and fear. He painted a picture of a dangerous, subversive group living within the empire. He said, "There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." Notice how he never names them. He dehumanizes them, making them a nameless, faceless other. He claims they are rebellious, a threat to the stability of the kingdom. It's a classic tactic of tyrants throughout history: create an internal enemy to rally support and justify atrocities. Then Haman made the king an offer he couldn't refuse. He sweetened the deal with a massive bribe. He said, "If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the king's treasuries for the men who carry out this business." 10,000 talents of silver. This was an astronomical sum, equivalent to possibly billions of dollars today, likely representing a significant portion of the entire empire's annual income. Haman was so consumed by his hatred that he was willing to personally bankroll a genocide. King Ahasuerus, a ruler who often seems more interested in parties and power than in just governance, barely hesitated. Perhaps he trusted Haman implicitly. Perhaps the money was too tempting. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Without asking which people Haman was talking about, without any investigation, he took his signet ring, the symbol of his authority, the ring used to seal official documents and make them unbreakable law, and gave it to Haman. "The money and the people are yours," the king said. "Do with them as you see fit." Just like that, with a casual wave of his hand, King Ahasuerus signed a death warrant for every Jewish man, woman, and child in his vast empire, which stretched from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written, dictated by Haman. It was a cold, brutal order. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, all Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. And to add a layer of personal incentive for the citizens to carry out this horror, the decree stated that their property could be taken as plunder. It was state-sanctioned murder and theft. Couriers on swift horses were dispatched from the capital city of Susa, carrying this death sentence to every corner of the 127 provinces. The decree was sealed with the king's ring, making it irrevocable according to the law of the Medes and Persians. The scripture gives us a haunting final image of this moment. After setting in motion a plan for mass extermination, the king and Haman sat down to drink. They celebrated. While they clinked their glasses in the palace, the capital city of Susa was thrown into confusion and dismay. The people were bewildered. How could such a terrible decree be issued? A cloud of fear and sorrow descended upon the city. But the despair was felt most acutely by Mordecai. When he learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, the traditional signs of deepest mourning and distress, and walked through the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. His cry was not just for himself, but for his entire people, now condemned to die. He went as far as the king's gate, but no one was allowed to enter the palace grounds dressed in sackcloth. His public display of grief was a stark, unavoidable symbol of the tragedy that had been unleashed. And it was from this gate, in this state of utter despair, that word of the decree would finally reach the one person who might have a chance to stop it. Queen Esther. She's about to learn the terrible fate that awaits her people, and she will be faced with a choice that will determine not only her own destiny, but the survival of an entire nation. The stage is set for a confrontation of epic proportions. This story serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of unchecked pride, the poison of prejudice, and the terrifying ease with which evil can be legislated. It's a somber note to end on, but it's crucial for understanding the stakes as we move forward. The darkest hour is often just before the dawn. Have you ever felt like the weight of the world was on your shoulders? Like you were the only one who could possibly make a difference, but the risk was just too high? Today, we're diving into a story about exactly that. A moment of crisis, a cry for help, and a decision that would change the course of history. Imagine this. A decree has gone out across a vast empire, sealing the fate of an entire people. It's a death sentence, signed and sanctioned by the most powerful man in the land, King Ahasuerus. The architect of this horrific plan is Haman, a man consumed by pride and hatred. When Mordecai, a faithful Jew and a loyal servant, hears this news, his world shatters. The Bible tells us he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, the ultimate symbols of grief and despair, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. This wasn't a private sorrow. It was a public outcry, a desperate lament for his people, who were now marked for destruction. This cry of anguish reaches the palace walls, and word gets to the one person who might have a chance to stop it: Queen Esther. When her attendants tell her about Mordecai's public mourning, she's deeply distressed. She sends him fresh clothes, trying to bring him comfort, to pull him out of his public display of grief. But Mordecai refuses. This isn't about personal comfort, it's about a national crisis. He needs her to understand the gravity of the situation. So, he sends a messenger back to Esther. But this time, it's not just a message of sorrow. It's a call to action. He gives the messenger a copy of the king's edict, the written proof of the planned genocide, and he lays the burden squarely on Esther's shoulders. He urges her, commands her, to go before the king, to plead for her people, to intercede on their behalf. Now put yourself in Esther's shoes. This is not a simple request. The palace she lives in, a place of luxury and privilege, is also a cage of rigid protocol. She sends a message back to Mordecai reminding him of a terrifying reality. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law: that they be put to death. There was only one exception. If the king extended his golden scepter, their life would be spared. And for Esther, the situation was even more dire. She adds, "And I have not been summoned to see the king for the past 30 days. Think about that. 30 days of silence. She had no idea what the king's mood was, whether she was still in his favor, or if he had grown tired of her. To approach him uninvited was to gamble with her life. Her fear was real, it was rational, and it was paralyzing. She was caught between the potential wrath of her husband, the king, and the certain doom of her people. It felt like an impossible choice. But Mordecai refuses to accept her fear as the final answer. He sends back a message that has echoed through the centuries, a message that cuts through her fear and pierces right to the heart of her purpose. He tells her, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish." He is essentially saying, "Esther, your position won't save you. Your silence is not a shield. You are part of this people, and their fate is your fate." But then he delivers the line that changes everything, a question filled with divine possibility. "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" For such a time as this. Those words shifted Esther's entire perspective. Suddenly, her queenship wasn't just about comfort and status, her beauty, her position, her influence. It wasn't an accident. It was an appointment. It was a strategic placement by a sovereign God for a specific, critical moment in history. This wasn't just a risk. It was her destiny. Her fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. This realization gave her the courage to make a decision that would defy the law of the land and trust in the providence of her God. And what she does next is a masterclass in faith and bravery. This story is such a powerful reminder for all of us. We may not be queens or face literal death sentences, but we all have moments where we are called to be courageous. Maybe it's speaking up for what's right, helping someone in need, or stepping out in faith when it feels risky. And in those moments, we can ask ourselves the same question Mordecai asked Esther. Who knows? Maybe I was put in this position with my unique gifts and circumstances for such a time as this. Thank you so much for joining me today. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into these incredible accounts of faith and courage. Last time, we left Esther with a monumental decision hanging over her head, a decision that could cost her everything but also save her people. Mordecai had challenged her, saying, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" And now we're about to see how she responds. Esther, faced with this incredible weight, doesn't rush into action. She doesn't rely on her own strength or cleverness. Instead, she turns to the ultimate source of strength. She sends a message back to Mordecai saying, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do." This is so powerful. Esther understands that this battle isn't just a political one, it's a spiritual one. She is calling for a national movement of prayer and fasting, uniting her people in a single purpose before God. She's not just asking them to do something she isn't willing to do herself. She leads by example, committing to the same rigorous fast. And then she utters those famous chilling words, "Then I will go to the king though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Can you feel the gravity of that statement? She has counted the cost. She knows that stepping into the king's inner court without being summoned is a capital offense. The law was absolute. No one, not even the queen, was exempt. By saying, "If I perish, I perish," she is completely surrendering the outcome. She is placing her life, her future, and the fate of her people into God's hands. It's a breathtaking display of faith and courage. She has moved from a place of fear for her own life to a place of selfless sacrifice for the lives of others. This is the heart of a true hero. So for 3 days and 3 nights, an entire city is quiet. The Jewish people in Susa, from the greatest to the least, are fasting and praying. Imagine the atmosphere, the solemn unity, the desperate pleas rising to heaven. And in the palace, Queen Esther and her maids are doing the same. They are preparing not just physically, but spiritually for the confrontation to come. This period of fasting is crucial. It's a time of emptying oneself of fear and pride, and being filled with divine strength and wisdom for the impossible task ahead. It's a lesson for all of us, isn't it? When we face our own impossible situations, our first move shouldn't be to panic or scheme, but to pause, pray, and seek guidance. The 3 days are over. The fast is complete. The moment of truth has arrived. The Bible tells us that on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. This isn't just about looking presentable. This is a deliberate act. She is dressing for her role as queen. She is stepping into her identity and authority. She's not approaching the king as a timid girl, but as the rightful queen of Persia. She positions herself in the inner court of the king's palace, directly in front of his throne room. She stands where he is sure to see her. She's done everything she can. She has prayed, she has prepared, and now she takes the step of faith. The rest is out of her hands. King Xerxes is sitting on his royal throne. He looks up and sees Esther standing in the court. What will he do? Will he be angered by her audacity? Will he call for the guards? The tension is immense. Every silent second must have felt like an eternity for Esther. But then something wonderful happens. The Bible says, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. God moved the king's heart. Instead of anger, Xerxes feels affection. He holds out the golden scepter that was in his hand, the sign of acceptance, the sign of life. With immense relief, Esther approaches and touches the tip of the scepter. She has been granted an audience. She is safe. The king then speaks, and his words are incredibly generous. He asks her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." This is an extraordinary offer. The king is essentially giving her a blank check. He is so pleased to see her that he's willing to grant almost any request she could possibly make. The door has been flung wide open. This is the moment she's been waiting for, the moment she fasted and prayed for. So, what does she do? Does she blurt out, "Haman is trying to destroy my people. Please save us"? You would think so, right? This is her golden opportunity. But Esther demonstrates incredible wisdom and restraint. Her response is completely unexpected. She says, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." A banquet? That's it? She has the king's full attention, an offer of half the kingdom, and all she asks for is a dinner party with him and his most trusted advisor, Haman, the very man who is the architect of her people's doom. This move is pure genius, guided by divine wisdom. Why does she do this? Well, think about it. First, it piques the king's curiosity. He offered her half the kingdom, and she just wants to have dinner. This makes him wonder what could possibly be so important that she would risk her life only to delay her request. It ensures he will be listening with rapt attention when she finally does reveal her petition. Second, by inviting Haman, she brings her enemy right into the scene. She's setting the stage. This isn't just any dinner party, it's a carefully orchestrated prelude to justice. Haman, feeling honored and important, will be completely unsuspecting. He's being lulled into a false sense of security, making his eventual downfall all the more dramatic and just. Esther's patience here is a masterclass in divine timing. She understands that revealing everything at once in a public court might have been messy. A private banquet allows for a more controlled, intimate setting where she can have the king's undivided attention. She's not operating on her own panicked schedule. She's moving in step with a plan that is far bigger than her own. She trusts that the God who opened the king's heart will also give her the perfect moment to speak. She is a picture of what it means to be, as the saying goes, wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. This part of the story leaves us on another cliffhanger. Esther has survived the first test. She has gained the king's favor. She has set her plan in motion, a plan that is subtle, patient, and incredibly wise. But the great danger still remains. The decree to annihilate the Jews is still active. Haman is still powerful and proud, now even more so, having been exclusively invited to a banquet with the king and queen. What will happen at this banquet? Will Esther finally make her plea? And how will the king react when he learns that his favorite advisor has plotted to murder his queen's entire people? The stage is set for a dramatic confrontation. The courage and wisdom of Esther are truly something to behold. From her initial fear to her resolute declaration, "If I perish, I perish," and now to her patient strategic planning, she is an incredible example of how faith and action work together. It reminds us that sometimes the wisest move is not the most obvious one, and that waiting on the right timing is just as important as having the courage to act. Thank you so much for joining me for this part of Esther's incredible story. I hope it's been as encouraging and inspiring for you as it has been for me. Last time, we left off with Queen Esther taking a massive risk, inviting the king and her nemesis, Haman, to a private banquet. But instead of revealing her request, she invited them to a second banquet the next day, leaving everyone in suspense. Haman left that first feast feeling on top of the world. He was the only person besides the king invited to dine with the queen. He was powerful, wealthy, and had the king's ear. But as he walked home, his joy evaporated. He saw Mordecai, the Jew, at the king's gate, who still refused to bow down to him. This one act of defiance completely overshadowed all of Haman's honors. He went home in a rage, gathering his wife and friends. He boasted about his wealth, his many sons, and his incredible promotions. He bragged, "Even Queen Esther let no one but me come with the king to the banquet she prepared, and tomorrow I am invited by her again, along with the king." But then he added, "Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." His entire happiness was poisoned by one man's refusal to acknowledge him. His wife, Zeresh, and his friends had a sinister suggestion. They told him, "Have a gallows built, 75 feet high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai executed on it. Then you can go happily with the king to the banquet." The idea delighted Haman. It was the perfect solution. He would eliminate the source of his frustration and then enjoy his feast. So, he immediately ordered the massive gallows to be constructed, imagining Mordecai's downfall. But that very night, something extraordinary happened. The king couldn't sleep. It's fascinating how history can turn on a single sleepless night. Tossing and turning, King Ahasuerus ordered the Book of the Chronicles, the official records of his reign, to be brought and read to him. What are the chances? Out of all the records, all the stories of battles and decrees, the attendant happened to read the specific entry about Mordecai. The record detailed how Mordecai had uncovered a plot by two of the king's chamberlains to assassinate him, saving the king's life. The king stopped the reading. "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" he asked. His servants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." Imagine the king's surprise. A man had saved his life, and his loyalty had gone completely unrewarded. It was a major oversight, a debt that needed to be paid. At that very moment, as the sun began to rise, a figure appeared in the outer court of the palace. The king asked, "Who is in the court?" The servants told him, "It is Haman." What timing! Haman had arrived bright and early, bursting with eagerness. He was there to ask the king for permission to execute Mordecai on the gallows he had just built. Before Haman could even speak a word of his dark request, the king called him in and posed a question. "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman's heart must have leapt. His ego was so immense, he couldn't imagine the king wanting to honor anyone but himself. "Who would the king delight to honor more than me?" he thought. So, Haman, thinking he was planning his own glorious parade, laid it on thick. He suggested the most extravagant public honor he could dream up. "For the man the king delights to honor," he said, "let them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Let the robe and the horse be handed to one of the king's most noble princes. Let him robe the man the king delights to honor, lead him on the horse through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" He described a ceremony fit for a second king, a display of ultimate royal favor. The king listened to this grand proposal and loved it. He looked at Haman and gave a command that must have felt like a physical blow. "Go at once," the king ordered. "Get the robe and the horse, just as you have said, and do all this for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not leave out a single detail of all that you have suggested." The irony is staggering. The words Haman had designed for his own glory were now a script he had to perform for the man he hated most in the world. The man he had come to sentence to death, he now had to publicly celebrate. Can you imagine the humiliation? Haman had no choice. He had to obey the king. He took the royal robe and the king's horse, found Mordecai at the gate, and dressed him in the king's own splendor. He then led Mordecai on horseback through the city, shouting the proclamation he himself had written, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." The entire city witnessed this unbelievable reversal. The man who was supposed to be executed was instead being paraded as a hero, led by his own archenemy. After the parade, Mordecai simply returned to his post at the king's gate, unchanged by the sudden honor. But Haman, he rushed home, his head covered in grief and shame, completely devastated. He told his wife and friends about the mortifying ordeal. They had no comfort to offer. In fact, they saw the writing on the wall. "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of Jewish origin," they said, "you will not stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." They recognized this as a turn of fate that Haman could not fight. While they were still speaking, the king's eunuchs arrived. It was time for the second banquet. They hurried Haman along, a man now filled with dread and humiliation, to the feast Queen Esther had prepared. The atmosphere at this second banquet must have been electric with tension. The king, Esther, and a thoroughly defeated Haman sat down to dine. Once again, as they were drinking wine, the king turned to Esther. "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." The moment of truth had finally arrived. This was it. Esther had waited, she had planned, and now, with Haman's pride shattered and the king's favor toward Mordecai established, the time was perfect. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request." The king was stunned. Her life? Her people? What was she talking about? He had no idea she was in any danger. "For I and my people have been sold," she continued, "to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." She used the exact brutal words from Haman's own decree. She then added, "If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because that kind of trouble would not justify disturbing the king." King Ahasuerus was enraged. Someone had dared to plot against his own queen and her people right under his nose. "Who is he?" the king demanded. "Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" And with all eyes on her, Queen Esther looked directly at the terrified man sitting with them and declared, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." The accusation hung in the air. Haman turned pale with terror before the king and queen. The king, absolutely furious, jumped up from the table and stormed out into the palace garden to process this betrayal. Haman's world had completely crumbled. He knew he was doomed. In a moment of sheer desperation, he threw himself onto the couch where Esther was reclining, begging for his life. Just then, the king returned from the garden. What he saw sent him into an even greater fury. He saw Haman on the queen's couch and misinterpreted the desperate plea as an assault. "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" the king roared. As soon as the words left the king's mouth, the guards covered Haman's face, a sign of his condemnation. Then one of the king's eunuchs, Harbona, spoke up. He had seen the gallows Haman had prepared. "A gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house," he said. "He had it made for Mordecai, the one who spoke up to help the king." The king's response was swift and decisive. "Execute him on it," he commanded. So they took Haman and carried out the king's order on the very gallows Haman had built for Mordecai. And only then did the king's fury finally subside. What an incredible turn of events! Justice in this story is not only served, but served with a profound and poetic irony. This story is a powerful reminder that things are not always as they seem. A moment of pride can precede a great fall, and a moment of faithfulness, even when it seems unnoticed, can be remembered at just the right time. Last time we talked, the situation for the Jewish people in Persia was looking incredibly bleak. A death decree had been signed, sealed, and sent out across the entire empire. It felt like all hope was lost. But we left off with Queen Esther making a monumental decision, a decision that would require more courage than anything she had ever done before. Esther, hearing of the plot from her uncle Mordecai, realized her unique position. She wasn't just a queen. She was a lifeline. But she knew she couldn't do this alone. She sent a message back to Mordecai saying, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do." Think about the weight of this moment. Esther is calling for a national act of desperation and dependence. This wasn't just about skipping a few meals. In the ancient world, fasting was a profound spiritual act. It was a way of humbling yourself, of stripping away all worldly comforts and distractions to focus completely on God. It was an admission that human strength was not enough. They were facing an impossible situation, and they needed a divine intervention. For 3 days and 3 nights, an entire community united in prayer and fasting, their collective hopes resting on the shoulders of one young woman. While her people prayed, Esther prepared. This wasn't just a spiritual battle, it was also a strategic one. After 3 days of fasting, the moment of truth arrived. The Bible says she put on her royal robes. Imagine that scene. After days of physical and spiritual depletion, she adorns herself in the splendor of her office. This wasn't vanity. This was her armor. It was a symbol of her authority and her right to be in the king's presence, an authority granted to her by the same God she had been praying to. She then stood in the inner court of the king's palace, directly in front of the throne room. This was the point of no return. Remember the law: anyone who approached the king uninvited would be put to death, unless he extended his golden scepter. Every step she took was a step of faith, a step into the unknown. The text simply says, "The king was sitting on his royal throne. He held her life in his hands, and then the miracle they had all been praying for happened. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her." The king's heart was softened. Instead of wrath, he showed favor. He extended the golden scepter toward her, and Esther approached and touched the tip of it. Her life was spared. The first and perhaps highest hurdle had been cleared. The power of prayer and fasting was already evident. The king then asks her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be given you." This is an extraordinary offer. The king is essentially giving her a blank check. He is so pleased to see her that he is willing to grant a massive request on the spot. This is where we see Esther's incredible wisdom and patience truly shine. You might expect her to pour out her heart right then and there, to expose Haman's wicked plot and plead for her people. But she doesn't. Her strategy is far more subtle and brilliant. Instead of making her big request, she says something completely unexpected. "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." Why? Why the delay? Esther understood the man she was married to. King Xerxes was a man who enjoyed feasts, luxury, and feeling important. A direct confrontation in the throne room might have been too abrupt, too political. But a private banquet, that was an invitation he couldn't refuse. It was personal, intimate, and it honored him. More importantly, it put him in a relaxed and receptive mood. And notice who else she invites. Haman. This is a masterstroke of strategy. By inviting Haman, she does a few things. First, she lulls Haman into a false sense of security. He would feel untouchable, being singled out for such an honor alongside the king. His pride would be inflated to epic proportions, making his eventual fall all the more dramatic. Second, it ensures that when she finally makes her accusation, her enemy is right there. There would be no chance for him to escape or spin a different story. He would be trapped. So, the king agrees, and Haman is summoned. They go to Esther's first banquet. Picture Haman's arrogance as he walks into that private dining hall. He feels like he's on top of the world. The feast is lavish. The atmosphere is perfect. Once again, as they are drinking wine, the king asks Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." The stage is set. The king is ready to listen. Haman is present. This seems like the perfect moment. But once again, Esther shows incredible restraint. She delays. Her answer is astonishing. "My petition and my request is this," she says, "if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." She asks for a second banquet. This is brilliant. Why do it? This delay achieves several critical things. It builds the king's curiosity to a fever pitch. He's now been asked to 2 exclusive banquets and is still in the dark about his wife's deep concern. He'll be thinking about it all night, wondering what could be so important that it requires such a dramatic lead-up. This delay also gives Haman one more night to bask in his own pride, to let it fester and grow, sealing his own doom. But most importantly, this delay allows for one more crucial piece of the puzzle to fall into place. It creates a space in the timeline for God to orchestrate another coincidence that will be absolutely vital to the story's outcome, something we'll talk about in our next video. Esther's approach teaches us so much about wisdom, patience, and divine timing. She didn't rush. She didn't act on impulse. She fasted, she prayed, she prepared, and she waited for the perfect moment. She understood that a request of this magnitude needed the right setting and the right timing. She trusted that the same God who had opened the king's heart would also guide her steps and her words. That very night, something incredible happens. The king, Xerxes, just can't sleep. Tossing and turning, he decides to have the royal chronicles read to him, basically the official records of his kingdom. As the scribe drones on, a particular entry catches his attention. It's the story of how a man named Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate him, saving his life. The king asks, "What honor or recognition has Mordecai received for this?" His servants reply, "Nothing has been done for him." This realization strikes the king right at the break of dawn. Just then, who should appear in the outer court? None other than Haman. He's arrived early, eager to ask the king's permission to execute Mordecai on the massive gallows he had just built. But before Haman can even speak, the king asks him a question. What should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman's ego inflates. He thinks, who else could the king want to honor more than me? So he lays it on thick. For the man the king delights to honor, Haman suggests, let them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let him robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. You can imagine the king's smile. Excellent idea, he says. Go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect a single detail of all you have proposed. The shock on Haman's face must have been epic. The very man he came to destroy, he now has to honor in the most public way imaginable. So filled with humiliation, Haman takes the robe and the horse, finds Mordecai, and leads him through the city, shouting the proclamation he himself had devised. Afterward, a devastated Haman rushes home, covering his face in shame, while Mordecai calmly returns to his post at the king's gate. It's a breathtaking reversal of fortune, a divine setup for what's to come. Later that day, it's time for Queen Esther's second banquet. The king, Haman, and Esther are dining together again. Feeling generous, the king says to Esther, "Now, my queen, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. This is the moment." Taking a deep breath, Esther finally speaks her heart. "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated." The king is stunned. "Who is he?" he demands. "Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther looks directly at the man seated beside them and declares, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Terror grips Haman. He turns pale as he stands accused before the king and queen. The king, exploding in a rage, storms out into the palace garden to process this betrayal. In that moment of panic, Haman throws himself at Queen Esther's couch, begging for his life. Just as he does, the king walks back in and sees Haman on the couch where the queen is reclining. "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" the king roars. The moment the words leave the king's mouth, the guards cover Haman's face. His fate is sealed. Then one of the king's eunuchs points out, a gallows, 75 feet high, stands by Haman's house. He had it built for Mordecai, the man who spoke up to help the king. The king's command is swift and final. Execute him on it. So they hang Haman on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The king's fury finally subsides, but the edict to destroy the Jews still stands, setting the stage for the final dramatic chapter. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. If you remember, she had just exposed the wicked Haman's plot to annihilate the Jews right in front of her husband, King Ahasuerus. The tension was palpable. Today, we witness the stunning conclusion to this epic saga. The tables are about to turn in a way no one could have predicted. So King Ahasuerus, furious at Haman's treachery, storms out into the palace garden. Haman, in a panic, realizes his life is over. He throws himself at Queen Esther's couch, begging for his life. Just then, the king walks back in and sees this. He misinterprets the scene, thinking Haman is assaulting the queen. "Will he even assault the queen while I am in the house?" the king roars. That was the final nail in Haman's coffin. One of the king's eunuchs points out the giant gallows Haman had built for Mordecai, the very man who had saved the king's life. In a moment of perfect poetic justice, the king commands, "Hang him on it." And just like that, Haman is executed on the very structure he intended for his innocent rival. This is a powerful reminder that pride comes before a fall, and that evil often ensnares itself in its own trap. But the story doesn't end there. Haman's execution solves one problem, but the deadly decree against the Jews is still in effect. According to Persian law, a king's edict could not be revoked. This is where things get truly interesting. On that very day, King Ahasuerus gives Queen Esther the entire estate of Haman, and Mordecai, the humble man who refused to bow to Haman, is finally brought before the king. Esther reveals that Mordecai is her cousin, her guardian. The king, recognizing Mordecai's loyalty, takes off his signet ring, the one he had given to Haman, and gives it to Mordecai. Can you imagine that moment? Mordecai is now second in command, holding the king's authority. Esther, in turn, appoints Mordecai to manage Haman's former estate. It's a breathtaking reversal of fortune. Still, the threat looms. Esther, weeping, falls at the king's feet again. She pleads with him to find a way to stop the disaster Haman had set in motion. The king, moved by her love for her people, extends his golden scepter to her once more. He tells Esther and Mordecai, "Look, I've given you Haman's house and had him executed. Now you write a new decree in my name for the Jews, whatever seems best to you, and seal it with my ring." This was a brilliant solution. They couldn't cancel the first decree, but they could issue a new one to counteract it. So, Mordecai, now wielding the king's authority, summons the royal scribes. A new edict is written and sent racing across all 127 provinces of the vast Persian Empire, from India to Ethiopia. And what did this new decree say? It granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble, to protect their lives, and to defend themselves against any armed force that might attack them, their wives, and their children. It empowered them to fight back on the very day they were meant to be destroyed, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Imagine the relief, the sheer joy that swept through the Jewish communities when this news arrived. The Bible says that for the Jews there was light and gladness, joy and honor. In the capital city of Susa, Mordecai walks out of the palace wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large gold crown, and a purple robe of fine linen. The entire city celebrates. The dark cloud of fear had been replaced by a sunrise of hope. When the fateful day arrives, the Jews gather in their cities. But now they are not helpless victims, they are empowered defenders. The tables have completely turned. The fear of the Jews had fallen upon all the peoples and officials of the empire, because everyone knew that Mordecai was now a powerful figure in the king's court. So instead of being annihilated, the Jews triumphed over their enemies. They defended themselves successfully, and a great victory was won. In the capital of Susa, the fighting lasts for 2 days, and even Haman's 10 sons are executed, ensuring his wicked legacy is completely uprooted. To commemorate this incredible deliverance, this miraculous turn of events, Mordecai and Esther establish a new tradition. They declare that the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar should be celebrated every year by every generation, in every family, province, and city. This celebration would be a time of feasting and joy, a time for sending gifts of food to one another and giving presents to the poor. They called this festival Purim. The name comes from the word pur, which means lot, because Haman had cast the lot to determine the day for their destruction. But God turned their day of sorrow into a day of gladness. And so the festival of Purim was born. It's a holiday that Jewish people still celebrate today, a vibrant, joyful reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope is not lost. It's a testament to courage, faith, and the belief that destiny is not decided by the random casting of lots, but by a divine hand that guides and protects. The story of Esther concludes by telling us that Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus. He was great among his people and loved by them, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. What an incredible story, from the brink of annihilation to a place of honor and security. It shows the power of one person's courage, Esther's bravery to speak truth to power. It highlights the integrity of another, Mordecai's refusal to compromise his beliefs, and above all, it's a powerful narrative about deliverance and the triumph of good over evil. The Feast of Purim isn't just a historical footnote, it's a living, breathing celebration of survival and a powerful reminder that even when things seem hopeless, a new decree of hope can be written. Have you ever looked back on your life and seen a series of seemingly random, even difficult events that somehow led you to exactly where you needed to be? It's like a giant, intricate puzzle, where the pieces only make sense when you see the final picture. This incredible phenomenon is often described with the phrase, "The Lord works in mysterious ways, and his providence never fails." It's a beautiful summary of the story of Esther, a tale filled with so much uncertainty, danger, and yet an undeniable thread of divine guidance. Let's journey back together and explore this idea. Life rarely follows a straight line. We make plans, we set goals, and then suddenly a detour appears. It could be a job loss, a change in a relationship, or a challenge we never saw coming. In those moments, it's easy to feel lost, confused, or even abandoned. We might ask, why is this happening? Where is God in all of this? The story of Esther gives us a powerful answer. Think about Esther herself. She was an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai in a foreign land. She was part of a minority group, living under the rule of a powerful and unpredictable king. Her circumstances were far from ideal. Yet, through a series of unlikely events, this seemingly ordinary girl is chosen to be the queen of the Persian Empire. Was this just luck? A coincidence? Or was it the first move in a divine chess game that she couldn't yet see? The story takes a dark turn, with the rise of Haman, a wicked advisor to the king, who develops a deep hatred for Esther's cousin, Mordecai. This personal vendetta escalates into a genocidal plot to annihilate all the Jewish people in the empire. An official decree is sent out. A date is set for their destruction. Imagine the sheer terror and despair that must have swept through the community. From a human perspective, all hope was lost. The situation seemed completely impossible. This is where we see God's mysterious ways in full swing. Notice something fascinating about the Book of Esther. God's name is never explicitly mentioned, not once, yet his presence, his hand guiding every event, is undeniable. It's a profound lesson for us. Sometimes God's work isn't loud and flashy like a thunderclap. More often, it's a quiet, persistent whisper in the background, arranging circumstances, positioning people, and weaving everything together for a greater purpose. Mordecai understands this. He goes to Esther, the hidden queen, and delivers one of the most powerful lines in Scripture. "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" He saw the connection. He understood that Esther's unlikely rise to power wasn't for her own comfort or glory. It was for a purpose far greater than herself. Her entire life had been leading up to this single, pivotal moment. This is a question we should all ask ourselves. The unique position you're in right now, your job, your family, your community, your skills, what if you are there for such a time as this? What if the challenges you faced were actually training for a specific purpose God has for you? Esther had a choice. She could have stayed silent, hoping to save her own life. It was a terrifying risk. Approaching the king without being summoned was punishable by death, but she chose courage over comfort. She chose faith over fear. She declared a fast, sought the support of her people, and stepped into her destiny, saying, "If I perish, I perish." What follows is a masterclass in divine providence. Every detail falls perfectly into place. The king has a sleepless night and just happens to have the royal records read to him. He is reminded of how Mordecai previously saved his life from an assassination plot, an act for which Mordecai was never rewarded. The timing is impeccable. Just as the king is wondering how to honor Mordecai, who walks in? Haman, of course, arriving to ask the king's permission to execute Mordecai. The dramatic irony is stunning. The king asks Haman, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman, in his arrogance, assumes the king is talking about him and describes a lavish public celebration. The king then commands Haman to do all of this for Mordecai. Can you imagine the humiliation? The very man Haman wanted to destroy, he is now forced to publicly honor. You simply can't make this stuff up. This is God's providence at work, turning the tables in the most unexpected way. Then comes the climax at Esther's banquet. She bravely reveals her identity and exposes Haman's wicked plot. The king's fury is ignited, and in a final swift reversal of fortune, Haman is executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The threat is not just neutralized, it's completely inverted. The instrument of evil becomes the instrument of justice. The story doesn't end there. The original decree to destroy the Jewish people still stands. But now, through Esther and Mordecai's influence, a new decree is issued, allowing the Jews to defend themselves. The day that was meant for their destruction becomes a day of victory and deliverance. Looking back, we can see the chain of events. An orphan becomes queen, her cousin uncovers a plot, a sleepless king reads a forgotten record, an arrogant villain's plan backfires spectacularly. Each link in the chain was essential. If any one of them had been missing, the outcome would have been tragic. This is what it means when we say, His providence never fails. Even when we can't see the whole picture, even in the darkest of nights, a plan is unfolding. This ancient story is so relevant for our lives today. You might be in a season of waiting, confusion, or hardship. You might feel like your life is a series of random, disconnected events. You might be wondering if God has forgotten you. Let the story of Esther be a source of incredible hope. Your story is still being written. The challenges you're facing might be the very thing that positions you for such a time as this moment. The sleepless nights, the closed doors, the unexpected detours, they might just be God's mysterious way of guiding you, protecting you, and preparing you for something more beautiful than you can imagine. Trusting in His providence doesn't mean we won't face fear or difficulty. Esther was terrified, but it means we trust that even in the fear, even in the unknown, there is a purpose, and a loving God is working all things together for our good and His glory. So when life feels chaotic and you can't make sense of it, remember Esther. Remember that the God who orchestrated her incredible story is the same God who is orchestrating yours. His ways may be mysterious, but His providence never ever fails. He is always at work, weaving a masterpiece, even when we can only see a few of the threads. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this message encouraged you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. It really helps us reach more people. May you have a blessed and wonderful week, trusting in His unfailing plan for you.